DeSantis, who has zero chance of succeeding. This is the moment at which civilizations lose their way, and they don't last long after that.
In this video, I'm going to review Milo Yiannopoulos' recent appearance on the Tim Pool podcast. This was a fascinating exchange where they debated Ron DeSantis versus Donald Trump. They discussed the impending doom and collapse of Western civilization and exactly how that is going to happen. The dangers of feminism and the idea of Christian nationalism. This one is going to be deep. So with that, let's get into the clips.
Trump or Ron DeSantis? That's going to be the big debate here as well.
I don't think anybody is seriously in favor of DeSantis unless they're paid to be.
I strongly disagree with you on that, but that's going to be a topic we're going to be discussing here in a little bit.
If you're on Meghan McCain's side, you're on the wrong side. I felt a bit icky seeing Trump whine about the consultants. It didn't seem like a kind of alpha dog daddy thing that we're used to from Trump. Seemed a little bit pathetic. And my hope is that he will announce soon and get his mojo back, because at the same time as he's taking these very light touch, teasing pot shots at DeSantis, who has zero chance of succeeding. Look, DeSantis is almost as popular as Trump in some bits of Florida, but don't ask them to choose, because he is gone the second they have to choose between him and Trump. Don't get it twisted, okay? He has no chance. It is not happening.
But you think even in Miami and Tampa, Trump wasn't able to flip those districts?
You're out of your mind if you think that somebody with the charisma of a potted cactus can go up against Donald Trump and not end as just another casualty on the list. You're out of your mind. And looking at the rogues gallery of people who are being paid to support DeSantis, I think unless you can provide a compelling case, which to date I have not heard, you are being charmingly naive in falling in line with the worst people.
I can give a very compelling case for it.
The worst people in this country who want more than anything for the will of the people to be subverted. They want to suffocate Trump and all he stands for, and he is, of course, merely a proxy. He's a shorthand for a variety of things that they hate about Americans. They hate the gaucheness of the South. They hate everything about the South. They hate Appalachia, with its lack of sophistication. They despise and are contemptuous of the people who love Trump, and they are the architects of their misery. I mean, there's a reason that these places that vote for Trump have drug problems. It's because the coastal elites systematically killed these towns by taking all the manufacturing abroad to weaken the economic clout of Republican places.
Now,
okay, these places were deliberately and systematically sabotaged, and the result of that is like human misery on a scale that nobody really truly comprehends. There's now no reason for many of these towns in the South to exist, and they stagger on with no factories, with no jobs, with no hope, and people lose themselves in godlessness and in drugs and in all manner of self-destructive behaviors. That was done to them. That was the thing that was done to them. Okay, and Trump is a neat shorthand for the kinds of people that coastal elites consider to be beneath them. And the DeSantis project is about ensuring that Trump was a temporary, unfortunate blip, never to be repeated, because they think they have the right to determine that. They think they have the right to dictate that. I don't think that's going to pan out for them. I think they're going to continue to be humiliated, just as they have been every time they've tried this since.
Let me ask you a question.
I would love to hear your case for DeSantis, because
absolutely. But my first question would just be: if we took Trump and DeSantis, and we made a Venn diagram of everything they agreed on, what are the differences that you see that DeSantis doesn't have? That what is that X factor that Trump does have that you're talking about?
Well, you just said it. Trump is
the X factor.
Trump is a once in a generation charismatic authority that cannot be replicated. It cannot be imitated. As somebody who has a little slice of that kind of charisma myself, and has experienced a retinue of desperate clingers and imitators in my life, I can tell you it never pans out trying to just snatch the bits that you can stomach from the guy everybody loves and otherwise keep serving your special interests. Trump is a, look, whether you believe in God or not, you could express this in terms of ordainment if you wanted to, or you could just say that some people are born with a magical kind of personality that captivates people in a way that nobody else can imitate.
In terms of what people are getting from
DeSantis, on the other hand, has no identifiable personality at all.
Well, sure. But what symbol, policy, feeling do people get from Trump? What victory?
You're making the mistake that all politically minded people make, which is assuming that people vote on the basis of policy.
I said feeling.
DeSantis has scored some victories in Florida. He's been an excellent governor in Florida, and that's where he should stay, because he's been a very successful and excellent governor in Florida. But as I said, people like him in some bits of Florida almost as much as they like Trump. But ask them to choose, and he's out.
I'm trying to figure out on the gain people get from Trump they don't get from DeSantis, and that can be emotional.
It's precisely that. It's precisely that magical intangible that you try to articulate and stumble, and then when you go to a rally, you're like, "That's what I was talking about."
It's kymetics, man. It's vibration. It actually alters DNA.
I don't know about that, but
sound can change the way people's body structure.
That sounds like nonsense, but
it's real. That's amazing. That's why music can heal people and stuff.
No,
so the people's voices
definitely not. But there are people who are born with that gift, and they typically find some way in which to express it.
Yeah.
Some of them become singers, some of them become actors. And
saying Trump exudes charisma doesn't quantify what's happening for us in a way that, so for me, right?
Of course it does.
Well, no, right.
Mesmerizing.
I get that. But what do... So a lot of people are motivated.
He's an intoxicant that blots out the sun. There is no conventional political candidate who has a chance.
What does an intelligent individual or working class person gain from that? A good feeling?
I don't know what kind of logical fallacy that is. What does an intelligent person gain?
Well, because you're saying the average person doesn't care about policy.
I can't speak for intelligent people, but...
So if no one actually cares about what their politicians are doing for them, then why should I care about Trump over DeSantis?
Trump is... What happened in 2016 was the last time that half this country felt good about themselves and like there might be hope. You cannot fight that.
Hope for what?
Trump.
What?
Their world wouldn't be ripped apart by social engineering and by other things I can't mention right now until the third hour. But there are things going on in this country that threaten the very basis of our civilization, that stem from original sins like women's suffrage, but go all the way through to more modern fads and manias to do with things we can't talk about. But there is the people are keenly aware that the physical reality of the world they live in, the facts they took for granted, are being ripped apart by the political descendants of.
Now I understand. I understand what you're saying.
So Trump in 2016. I was very blessed to have the opportunity to be such a big part of that, because that was the last time that an entire half of this country felt like things might end up okay. And he turned out to be disappointing in office, but how could he ever have been how could he ever have ended up otherwise?
You see, my gut instinct leads me to agree with Milo here. Now, this podcast was filmed just after the recent US midterm elections. And at the time, a lot of people are saying DeSantis 2024 after his fantastic performance in those midterms. And they're saying that Trump is done and he's over with. But for me, viewing it from afar, I just don't see that. And that's because Trump doesn't have fans, or he doesn't have supporters. He has devoted loyalists that will only be emboldened by the FBI's raid of Mar-a-Lago and by his supposed impending arrest and by the fact that they're basically making him into a political martyr. And when you look at the Trump rallies, they almost seem like this sort of religious experience for people where there's this infectious hope in the air. And like Milo alluded to, that's the essence of why people love Trump so much and why the image of him transcends just the politician. Because policies like NAFTA, for example, have left places like Middle America America completely destroyed. These places that used to be the manufacturing hubs of the country are now destitute and hopeless, with over 80,000 plants shutting down. I think that Milo's right when he suggests that for many of these people and for many of these communities, Donald Trump represented that last bastion of hope. So whilst DeSantis is a very popular and strong candidate, if it's between him and Trump, I think there's only one horse in that race. But many people do say that Trump's reputation is too damaged, that the media have smeared him so much, and that if he was to get back into office, it would be the start of a civil war because he's such a divisive character. And I definitely think that that is a good point. And Milo actually addresses that.
All right. Kyle Miller says, as someone who voted for Trump twice, I think it is time to move on. Mainstream media has tainted his image and now toxic to voters. DeSantis 2024.
His favorability is the same as Hillary Clinton in some polls.
It saddens me to see people with lack of faith like that. I think if you loved Trump, you should remind yourself of why and consider how much you really care about Trump's name being toxified by the media. Sounds like you have capitulated to the enemy narratives and accepted criticisms of Trump that actually don't matter at all. All that matters about Trump is if people love him and vote for him, he will be president. Doesn't matter what the New York Times thinks about him. They never liked him.
I think legitimate criticisms matter because they can make him better. Well, and I think he should have his feet held to the fire for doing so many wrong things.
Your closest friends should be your harshest critics.
Exactly.
And when we get into the next bit of the show, I have some things to say about that.
Okay.
But if you abandon the one person who imperfectly and perhaps disappointingly at least tried to break up the abusive stitch-up that is the prevailing American hegemony, sounds like you got the country you deserve, mate.
So I definitely see both sides of the argument there. But for me, the biggest criticism of Trump would be that he's just too old. He's currently 76, and by the time he gets into office, he'll be 78. So what do you guys think? Is that too old? I mean, knowing Donald Trump, he'll probably live till 150 and still be banging out games at 18 holes at Mar-a-Lago and winning.
What a shot. Beauty. You think Biden can hit a ball like that? Oh, no.
But you certainly wouldn't want him doing a Joe Biden on us.
That we're entering a late decadent period of gloating that is common to all illegitimate tyrannies. And the one we have right now is something that Orwell didn't foresee, a weird blend of private enterprise and government, run by the same people who operate both for their exclusive enrichment, and which has impoverished all of us in spiritual ways, in financial ways, in all kinds of ways, culturally, you name it. In every conceivable way, our lives and our society are getting dramatically worse with each day that passes. This gloating, the gleefulness with which they revel in their unaccountable and untrammeled power over us is intolerable and unsustainable. And when that happens in history, the empire in question typically falls really quickly, shortly thereafter. And when big empires fall, they don't fall like you think they're going to. They don't kind of ossify. They don't disintegrate. They evaporate. It happened to Rome. It happened to the USSR. And it will happen to America.
We're on that time period.
The vector for America is probably going to be the petrodollar and the dollar generally. When we have men doing things that women should be doing and women doing things that men should be doing, and when we commingle the definitions of those two things, we risk the whole system falling down. And I think that's what's happening. I think that's what we're witnessing. And Camille Paglia, the feminist critic, says that the one characteristic, an infallible guide to imminent collapse in all great civilizations in the past is an obsession with, she calls it a kind of gender madness, right? Without getting into the subject in a way that would be dangerous, a preoccupation with innovative and sometimes confusing new definitions of things, a sort of confusing of this fundamental natural law. This is the moment at which civilizations lose their way, and they don't last long after that. So I think that It is a man's responsibility to protect and to provide.
So Milo touched on the work of Camille Paglia there, and this is such a fascinating topic. In Camille Paglia's work, she's studied many different cultures from throughout history, and the conclusion that she's come to is that themes of androgyny and homosexuality and sadomasochism and gender impersonation are signs of cultural decadence. It's a sign that a culture is losing its way and that a collapse is imminent, sort of like a writing on the wall. And some of the examples that she cites were, for example, the Greeks, whose statues went from being chiseled alpha males to impotent noodle-looking men. She also cites the Romans, Weimar Germany, Egypt, Babylon, the Byzantine Empire, and even Oscar Wilde's work in the later stages of the British Empire. And a similar idea is also found in the work of a 1930s sociologist anthropologist named J.D. Unwin. Unwin's book, Sex and Culture, did a vast study of many different cultures throughout history, based on art, literature, agriculture, and many different factors. And the conclusion that he came to was that there are two main factors that indicate a flourishing society. The first of which being, is there a culture of chastity before marriage? And the second of which being, is there a culture of permanence, fidelity, and exclusivity during marriage? He observed that as societies develop, they become more sexually liberal. When they do so and abandon the aforementioned values, it takes roughly 3 generations for these societies to unravel. And when you look at his work and then Camille Paglia's work that suggests that Western culture is at its later stages, it does make sense because a generation is about 20 or 30 years. If the sexual revolution happened in the West in the 1960s, then we are roughly at that time where societies tend to fail. And another hallmark of this, and Paglia mentions this in her work as well, is the disconnect between societies who value masculinity and societies who don't. We saw the difference between the Russian military adverts compared to the American ones.
Познать границы своих возможностей. К черту границы. А без боя нет победы. Но на самом деле, главный враг – это задача выследить врага, догнать его, превзойти, стать лучше, чем он.
It begins in California, with a little girl raised by 2 moms. I also marched for equality. I like to think I've been defending freedom from an early age.
And we see the way that China actually curates the sort of information and the sort of content that their youth are consuming, whereas they actually enable and promote degenerate content to the Western youth. And just this week, we may have seen another monumental step in terms of the collapse of the West as a global superpower and the rise of other nations such as Russia and China, with the meeting that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping had, where they promised to bring about a new world order.
Это как раз сейчас перемены, которые не было в течение 100 лет. Как вместе двигаем эти перемены. Перекиньте, пожалуйста, дорогой друг.
And Milo briefly mentioned that the vector would be the petrodollar.
The vector for America is probably going to be the petrodollar and the dollar generally.
For those of you who don't know, the petrodollar is basically the global system of exchanging oil for US dollars. And it dates back to a deal done between the USA and Saudi Arabia. And it's a very complicated topic, and I'll make a full video on that if you guys would like to see that. Just leave it in the comments. If the petrodollar were to fail, the US would have all of these extra dollars, which would cause massive inflation for the country and almost certainly spell the end of the US empire. And this is why the USA is so protective over the petrodollar. If you do some research into countries like Venezuela, Iraq, and Libya trying to challenge the petrodollar, you'll find that US intervention ensued very soon after. But the difference is, those countries are small fry compared to what they're up against now. Now you've got the BRICS alliance, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and also Saudi Arabia wanting to come into the mix. These are big global players, and big global players that aren't exactly too fond of America and Western values. So in short, you could interpret it that the USA is kind of on its knees right now. And I'm not thrilled about this, but when I look at the global chessboard, I think that what we might be looking at right now is a seismic shift in global power.
It's beneath the dignity of wives and mothers who have a far more important purpose on earth to give them, the petty workings of these political experiments that men have come up with to occupy themselves, to distract them with that stuff. And I don't think it's something that women especially love. I mean, women kind of hint this, they send us subtle indications that this might be the case. You see very often women kind of adopt the politics of their husbands. It's kind of a phenomenon that is actually more pronounced the more extreme that the husband's politics are. This is their way of telling us that they don't really care. It's just like they have other priorities. They want to feel safe. They want to feel secure. They want to feel loved, provided for, protected. And part of doing that is sparing women from the ugly, baffling, and frankly squalid world of politics, full of opportunists and freaks and inappropriate people. They're all the people who want power, right? The people in politics, and so we suffer them.
But you think women shouldn't be in politics?
I think that in America, because American men are so utterly pathetic, all talk and no action, that I find American women much more impressive than American men. And there are lots of examples of women having to step up where men have left vacuums. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is an example of that. She will readily tell you that in a perfect world, she wouldn't have to be doing this, but she felt that it was necessary and that she was the right person at the right time,
where
in the
are
right
men?
place. Because no man is doing it for her. So I see her as a kind of a sort of a Boudica, Joan of Arc kind of warrior queen archetype. She's doing the thing that no man will step up and do. And every couple of 100 years, men need a reminder like that they're reneging on their responsibilities. I don't think it's the proper arena of women to concern themselves with the intricacies of politics, because they have a higher and holier and much more important purpose to which their skills are better suited. And I think that when in the two world wars and women flooded the workplace out of necessity, and then you have the invention of the washing machine, which frees up this enormous amount of time. Once women had been pleaded with to come and keep the factory line running, nobody felt they had the right, coming back from war when they'd wrecked the world, to say, "All right, back in the kitchen, love." So they just sort of accepted the new reality. We can see what's happened as a result. There's been a feminizing of our institutions. Police forces have started to act more like school teachers, where they're kind of scolding people for using the wrong language rather than criminals. There's all kinds of hints that the priorities, that the mission statements, that the modus operandi of our state institutions and now private enterprises too have changed, and I don't think for the better, as a result of what was missold to women as emancipation and was actually their enslavement.
When the rules are so atomized, you can get someone in trouble for anything. Anybody who is acting out of line, you can say, "Oh, well, you're violating this provision."
This, I believe, is a manifestation of a frustrated maternal instinct from women who should have had children and didn't. And it's become a sort of it's become this kind of out of control, turbocharged policing of others. This attempt to impose order on the world, I lay the blame for this at the feet of men, who it's the job of a husband to establish the parameters within which his family will operate. These are the things that I will accept, and these are the things that I will not accept. And he counts on his partner to express those wishes in her daily decisions and in how she raises the children. Well, men haven't been doing that for a really long time. And the result has been anarchy. And not just chaos, but like true epistemological anarchy. They're like multiple fact universes in America now. There are people who believe completely different pictures of what they think is objective reality, right? Because instead of politics being the art of the possible grounded in reason, now we have competing narratives. And these narratives are completely factually divorced from one another, and in most cases from reality themselves as well. This is the result of, this is a feminization of discourse, because we become untethered from Mr. Banks's reason and discipline, which always falls on the man to hold in line. And instead we begin to indulge in, to put it in grammatical terms, right? Women live in the subjunctive. They live in the world of the possible, right? And the economy of value for women is completely different than it is for men.
Now, that's a pretty interesting exchange there. And when you look at the idea of the feminization of society and what happens when men fail in their leadership roles and that women expand endlessly, as Milo said. And we see this exact thing permeating the workforce and education systems and politics and tech companies and the way that we engage in discourse. I mean, cancel culture in itself is a very feminine thing, the idea of reputation destruction. And woke ideas and protecting anyone from getting their feelings hurt is also a very feminine notion.
It's not that we think that women are stupid or incompetent. Clearly, they can manage perfectly well in these spheres. Whether the effect is good or not, is another matter. But clearly, they can handle it. But it's allowing, encouraging them or enticing them to do so, as big business does because it's good for the bottom line, is only possible when you set to one side the reality of the magic and responsibility and incredible gift that women have that we don't.
I thought that was really, inspiring what you said about society kind of becoming overly mothered because women aren't having enough children, and so they're turning that motherly instinct outward.
Yeah, it's got to go somewhere. They're built for it. And if they choose, if they are lied to and choose their career over having babies, it has to come out somewhere. So what do? They end up in HR, where they get to make rules. That's another thing about women's suffrage is it's a kind of violation of the innocence of women that men are so attracted to. I mean, the soil that nourishes that protective instinct is the purity and innocence of young women who are unsullied by the ugliness of the world. Men can go out and be reckless and wreck their brains and make terrible mistakes and all the rest of it. But when you inject women into a sphere that they're not created to flourish in, it does something inexcusable to them. It is an imposition on them that I think that we owe them an enormous apology for, and we should try to set it right.
That's pretty profound what Milo said about the purity and innocence of women who are unsullied by the world. Because men have always been the ones who are willing to go out and hunt for food and fight wars and be exposed to the dark traumas and evil of the world. And that actually builds a man's character, but it destroys women. And it shows in the fact that men find femininity and innocence and purity something that's very attractive in a woman, whereas women find battle scars and a hardened and battle-tested man very attractive. And our culture is moving further and further away from that. I mean, women are becoming more masculine and men are becoming more feminine. And because we're so far away from this ideal, it's kind of unattainable. And I don't think that you can do it by force or by law. And this is why I often say that the best way to go about it is to create a culture where people are true to their natural biological instincts, where men are encouraged to be masculine, stoic leaders, and women are encouraged to be feminine, nurturing mothers.
In just the same way that many of these cultural problems have come from women's suffrage, the failure of the institutions to protect people is a result of American independence, because when you throw away the monarch, you don't really just get rid of him. You make space for something else to move in, and you might not have control over that. So America is now in a position where they are ruled more brutally and more savagely and more abusively than any monarch in living memory anywhere in the world. But they don't know the names of the people who are doing it to them.
It's central banks, it's the Federal Reserve, that's for sure.
Certainly they're a part of it. But what instead you have is the empty pomp and circumstance of the 4th of July. This rippling flag. Why do you love the flag so much? Because there's room to hide behind it. And the people who are really running the show, whose names none of us will ever learn, are what moved in. Instead of a king, instead of having a king, and people will differ on this very violently. I appreciate that. I'm probably taking a minority view on this, but when we think about how the earthly order should reflect the heavenly order, that's the sort of basis of legitimacy of the papacy and a monarchy, right? The way that societies are ordered reflects the heavenly order, and conforms to nature and the way that and our nature, the way that we were designed, the way that we work, and those are the best and happiest systems to live under. They work the best. The removal of the monarch from the top, and then these kind of weird self-sabotaging things like we're just gonna trust that everybody's going to be Christian, so we'll outsource morality to Christianity, and we'll give people these extraordinary freedoms that don't exist anywhere else, that wreck society unless the whole population is Christian, right? You cannot give people the First and Second Amendment unless they're Christian. You just can't, because only with that kind of incredible reverence for the sanctity of life can you trust people with weapons of war, and only with the responsibility that comes with knowing that you have to go to confession for lying can you be trusted with freedom to say anything without consequence.
I agree with your statement on second. I think that the Founding Fathers' perspective on society dictated their view of why everyone should be armed. They trusted each other. They all thought each other had some fear of doing wrong.
I just don't think they anticipated that the society would become godless. I think we're talking about the 1700s, right? I mean, you're living in the wake of the King James Bible, which changes everything, because it's people sometimes try to like demean it by saying it's the greatest work of literature in history, which is true, but stop. The way that the America's founding documents are phrased and the way that the founders spoke is heavily influenced to the point of dictated by the language and the style of the King James Bible, which came out in the early 1600s, right? So when this country is founded in the wake of this extraordinary moment, unique in the history of ideas, where one book like changes everything and sort of defines everything that follows it. I don't know. Did they ever imagine? I mean, when they enshrined freedom of religion, they were thinking about just like making sure that Protestant denominations weren't at each other's throats. They weren't intending for Ilhan Omar to come in and say some people did something, and for her to be sitting in Congress, allegedly from a family involved in very ugly things in her home country of Somalia. She couldn't possibly have sought election in this country for virtuous reasons. I can't imagine what they would have been. This is not what was intended.
The idea of American independence being a bad thing and going back to a monarchy, maybe I haven't read enough, but it's not even something that I've ever thought about. But I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys think in the comments. I mean, is that a totally crazy idea, or is that something that you're familiar with? But I think he makes an interesting point there about the right to the First and the Second Amendment being free speech and the right to bear arms. How do you have the right to bear arms without the sanctity of life? I mean, having the right to bear arms without faith and with the godlessness that's ripping through our culture certainly does pose a danger. And it is concerning when you see the lack of reverence for the ability to be able to create life, and for the proliferation of life on this planet to be actually discouraged, and for those in high places to be calling people a cancer on the planet. And this for me is where I find the idea of being God-fearing so profound. And it's something that for many years I just sort of laughed at. But there's something very deep about fearing God and always being accountable to God, being accountable to the ultimate good that there is in the universe. And even when nobody's watching, knowing that if you do the wrong thing, you have to answer to God. And I know that a lot of atheists watch this content, and I think you can be an atheist and live a really happy life and be a good moral person. And it can certainly work on an individual level. But on a societal level, I mean, I just don't think it works at all. You look at Stalin and Mao, they both banned religion in their societies, and look how that panned out.
And that's, this ugly phrase, Christian nationalism, that people are so afraid of. What it really is in my view, is a restitution of the original vision for America, but with a few more safeguards in place. So it's a acknowledgement that this country doesn't work without Christianity. It falls to pieces, and it is falling to pieces thanks to godlessness. Why? Because those understandings of the proper places and roles and functions of things aren't in the law anywhere. They exist in common law and in tradition and in custom in Europe, but this rupture that happens with the sedition and getting rid of the king resets the clock in America, and there's none of those things to draw on. And just trusting that people are going to stay Christian and therefore be nice to each other was stupid.
One thing I don't necessarily agree with is that there's a statement, we're made in the image of God. The universe is we're like fractals of reality. So there's one God, hence one monarch, and that is natural. I don't
know any Christians who talk about fractals of reality.
It's just scientific, observations.
Do you do a lot of LSD?
Not a lot. But I have dabbled.
That's a yes. That's a yes.
Keep your dosages low enough to stay sane, my friends.
A very dear friend of mine who's a very gifted photographer does little micro doses of LSD, and he has a similar phrasing to you on things.
Oh, cool. Well, what I'm thinking is...
You see, everybody thinks that they have this extraordinary, unique experience that turns them into a genius, but they all sound exactly the same. I'm just kidding, I'm sorry. Carol.
Oh, so there's one God. I agree that there is, in one sense, one overarching magnetic field or whatever the hell God is. But then there's also within that, it can be broken down to do infinite gods, all infinite fields creating one mega field. So in that sense, we could have one king, or we could have a decentralized system of many, many local leaders.
I think you've broken your brain.
Well, it's two ways of looking at one thing.
This sounds like astrology for men.
You didn't have to cut me off.
So Christian nationalism, and in Milo's words, it's the restitution of the original vision for America, but with a few safeguards in place because this culture doesn't work without Christianity. And this is not something I'm very well versed in, and from what I understand, it's quite a radioactive sort of topic in today's political discourse. And you've got guys like Milo and then Nick Fuentes and Ye who are in that Christian nationalist sort of camp. It's not something that I really research into or subscribe to because Kanye really loses me with the Hitler and the anti-Semitic stuff, and I also just find him completely insufferable to listen to. However, I can see why somebody would look around at this fallen Western culture and yearn for a return to a faith-based society, a society of morals and ethics and family structures and dignity. And also how the passive and agreeable nature of the church has led to many people just abandoning the religion. And it's led to drag performances in church. These ideas of progressivism in religion have led the church to stray so far away from its original fundamental values. And furthermore, when you go to other countries around the world, it's pretty clear that they're a Muslim country or they're a Christian country, etc., etc. So the idea of being a Christian country doesn't seem like anything crazy to me. So let me know in the comments if I'm butchering this, guys. What does a Christian nationalist America look like, and how would they go about achieving that? And what would that mean for people who practice other religions? Would it be the same as going to another country where they have their own customs and cultures and you assimilate into that culture, but you can still practice your own religion? Or would it be something more extreme than that? If you made it this far, then thank you very much for watching, and I hope you got plenty out of this video. And if you want to check me out on social medias, you can click that link tree in the bio, and also come along and join the Rattlesnake community at Local, where I do a free, uncensored, unfiltered show every single week for you guys to enjoy and engage with. And if you want to watch another video, then you will love the video that I did recently about Douglas Murray going to Doha and Qatar and debating the international refugee crisis. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, if you haven't already, then click right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.